as possible. Okay. Thank you, guys. All right, so shall we get started? Welcome everyone, and a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our AI and Central Banking Conference, a chance to explore the challenges and opportunities presented by artificial intelligence in the world of central banking. This event is proudly hosted by the Central Banking Research Center of ASB in partnership with the CSUN Center. My name is Yong Jie, and I'm honored to be your MC for this exciting event. This conference is a full-day event, and I encourage you to stay until the end to fully experience all that it has to offer. Not forgetting, we also have a half-day session tomorrow. So for those of you who signed up, see you then. If you'd like to sign up now, no worries. Just reach out to any one of us, and you still can join us for tomorrow's session. So I'd now like to invite you to watch our safety video, which will take roughly 3 minutes.
Welcome to the Asia School of Business campus. We're excited to have you here and hope you enjoy your time with us. As part of our commitment to your safety and well-being, here are a few important reminders in case of an emergency in either the academic or residential buildings. Whether you are in the ASB academic or residential buildings, the following emergency procedures apply. If you hear the emergency alarm once, please stay calm and wait for further instructions. If you hear the emergency alarm twice, please evacuate the building immediately. The emergency exits for the ASB academic building are located in the middle and at the ends of the buildings near the elevators. Look out for our fire marshals, who will guide you to the nearest emergency exit. You can recognize our fire marshals by their bright yellow vests. There are 2 assembly points for the ASB academic main building. The first point is on the north side of the building, in front of the main entrance, beside our restaurant. The second point is on the south side, near the ASB residence, by the front office in Block C. For ASBR, the assembly point is located at the south entrance, near the ASB academic main building. If you are seated in the Kazana National Auditorium, the exits are located at the sides and back of the hall. Please proceed to the north side assembly point, which is on the ceremonial driveway at the main entrance. If you are on levels 2, 3, 4, or 5, always use the nearest staircase to come down to the first floor. Be on the lookout for the emergency signage at the following venues. If you experience a medical emergency, please alert an event staff member or an ASB staff member immediately. First aid kits are located in the pantry on every level of the ASB academic building and at the front office for ASB residents. While in our vicinity, if you notice any potential hazards, kindly report them to any of our staff members immediately. If you have small children with you, please ensure they stay close to you and follow the evacuation procedures calmly. In the interest of safety, please ensure that your children are accompanied by an adult at all times. Please respect other visitors and the environment. Need a break? Restrooms are located in each wing. Our restaurant is located in the east wing on level 1. The lactation room and surau are available on the ground floor in the northwest area. You may request the passcode for the lactation room from the event's organizing team. Please be mindful of our smoke-free environment. Smoking is not permitted inside the building. Designated smoking areas are located outside the building. Thank you for your kind attention. We wish you a wonderful time on our campus. For more information, please contact our campus safety team. Stay safe and enjoy your time at ASB.
All right, so before we begin, I would like to share that we are broadcasting our keynote sessions later live on YouTube. So you can find the link here through the QR code. And let me pause a moment so you can share it with your friends and colleagues who can't make it to today's conference. So to avoid any disruption throughout the event, so kindly have your phones on silent, and please, if you need to take a call, please do so outside. In terms of general housekeeping, if you wish to speak during this conference, you can use the mic in front of you. So once it turns green, then you can speak into it, all right? So next, let me give you a quick overview of ASB and the programs we offer. We offer a full-time MBA program and an MBA, EMBA program. We also offer a Master's in Central Banking program, which is a year-long residential program exclusively for central bankers here in ASB. For those of you looking to upskill, we also offer exclusive executive education programs covering many areas. For brevity today, I'll just talk a bit about our econs program and our Islamic finance program and also our financial crimes program. So lastly, we're thrilled to also introduce our latest program, which is Agile Continuous Education, ACE. These modular hybrid courses are essentially designed to keep professionals at the forefront of their fields. Now, if you have any questions, feel free to approach any one of us wearing this red tag. We will be more than happy to talk to you more about these programs that we offer. All right, so without further ado, to start things off, let's welcome Professor Sanjay Sarma, CEO, President, and Dean of the Asia School of Business.
Thanks very much, Yongbin. Great to see you all. Welcome. Yongbin. Yongche. It's a pleasure to have you. I just want to kick things off by saying a few words about AI and why this is, for me personally, very important as well. I think it's important for people to realize that AI did not happen in 2022. AI is 85 years old. I actually took my first AI course in 1991. And at that time, AI was in its downfall. And this was in Carnegie Mellon with people like Newell and Herb Simon, who had previously won the Nobel Prize in economics. And he's one of the pioneers of AI. And the issue with AI has always been, we always knew it was going to take off, but it took 80 years to become an overnight success, as I like to joke. The other thing I wanted to, and it took off because of brute force computing, GPUs. GPUs today are powering at a scale that is almost impossible to comprehend. A NVIDIA GPU, just for the record, has 104 billion transistors, 104 billion transistors. And a single GPU consumes 700 watts. A single rack, which is like 4 of your domestic ovens stacked one on top of another in terms of size, consumes the equivalent of 50 ovens. And that's the heat that these data centers, high performance computing centers put out. We're talking about something pretty stunning here. So, often I hear the remark, oh, it's just interpolation. That's just completely missing the point. This is not regression. The way to think about AI, especially large language models, neural networks, etc., AI is mathematically, you could say, it is the most complete approximator known. These AI systems, these neurons, each of them has a nonlinearity in it, a ReLU function, a sigmoid function. And because you add up all these, or you multiply up all these nonlinearities, you create an incredible interpolator. Yes, it's an interpolator, but not really. But in addition, what AI does, which regression does not do, is in regression you have to handcraft your features. AI, neural networks, through a process called backpropagation, actually compute the features for you in something called a latent space. And large language models, for those of you who are interested, are based on another incredible intellectual breakthrough, which is reducing words and language to vectors. So these are staggering, staggering breakthroughs. So for those who say, oh my God, it's just regression, I go, you're missing the point. This is something different. This is 100 years, basically, more than 100 years of neuroscience, computer science, hardware, math, other breakthroughs coming together. Heat transfer, power coming together to provide a level of mimicking of the $186 billion, 86 billion neurons in every human brain, and a level of computation that is unprecedented. And the results are there to see. I mean, the amount of intelligence, in some reduced sense of human intelligence, that AI systems can mimic and replicate cannot be scoffed at. The implications are incredible. And those of you who use ChatGPT or more recently GPT-4 with visual processing, where you can actually take the version of the latest version from OpenAI, and I can point it at an object and ask it what it is, live, and it'll interpret it for you, right? This level of competition and its implications on everything that we do, from human existence, from jobs, to education, to your roles, for those of you who are in the central banking world, cannot be ignored. So it's great to see this. It is great to see this community take on, understand, assimilate, discuss, perhaps negotiate some controversies in AI. The implications for economics are incredible. I'm sort of in the middle. I'm a little bit worried. I was a skeptic, as you know, for many years. I refused to put AI in my resume, and now I'm scared. I really think the implications on job will be really significant. I'll talk more about that as I introduce my friend David Autor in a minute. I worry about things like what happens to middle managers. I worry about what happens when more and more folks see their jobs eliminated. There's a field now called agentic AI. Most of the AI you see today is assistive AI. It's ChatGPT. You ask it a question, it gives you an answer. Agentic AI is when an insurance agent is replaced by a bot. Agentic AI is when a car drives itself, which, by the way, if you've been to California and you take a Waze vehicle, right, is real. There is no driver. There is no insurance agent. Now, of course, human judgment, complementary skills, creativity, these are all very fundamental. And our education system hopefully will wake up to the fact that repetitive or automatable skills are now at risk. I hope our efforts to retrain working people will gather steam, and we will finally take this seriously. I hope we realize that having an education system that really creates robots has no excuse when the real robots show up and they take our jobs, right? I hope these are all things we take seriously. But with agentic AI, which is just beginning to take off, now finally we're confronting the reality of agents taking jobs away. Now, is this alarmist? I don't know. But if, in fact, it does happen, then you get into issues like, well, how do people get income? And of course, the Silicon Valley bros, as they're called, who have the answer to every question, right? The Elon Musks of the world will argue that, will make up arguments about universal basic income, things like that, right? Just redistributing wealth. But people like John Drays and others have talked about why that doesn't work. Anyway, the point is we are in the throes of a revolution, and to scoff or to ignore is not the answer. Maybe we will have reasonable conversations and come to the conclusion that it's not something to be completely alarmed about, but we cannot ignore it. So thank you for coming to this conference. Just in the interest of time, because we have to start in about 3 minutes with David Autor's presentation, I'll just take a minute and introduce my dear friend David. So David is the 1972 Gail Rubin Professor, Daniel 1972 and Gail Rubin Professor in the MIT Department of Economics. He's a co-director of the National Bureau of Economic Research Labor Studies Program and the MIT Shaping the Future of Work initiative. So David and I served on many things together. He led a commission called the Work of the Future, and I was a part of that. He is one of the pioneers in looking at the working middle class and how it's going to impact them. He, in fact, coined the term the barbell economy, and The Economist actually called him the academic voice of the American worker. On his website, he notes that John Oliver, the American comedian, also referred to him as a twerpy economist, which he proudly says he deserves. He says that. I don't think he deserves it. I think he's an amazing economist. Just a quick summary of his academic journey is very interesting. David started at Tufts and then out of the blue I remember him describing it to someone. He decided to go to San Francisco and teach underprivileged youth computer skills at a church in San Francisco, the Grace Chapel, I think. And then from that, he returned to the Kennedy School at Harvard, got his master's and PhD there. We're almost exact contemporaries, and then became an assistant professor at MIT. He's won every award there is to win, pretty much. He and Deron Acemoglu and I were having an argument about something, which we often do about education, actually about AI. And then Deron Acemoglu went and won the Nobel Prize. So that ended that argument because he's vanished. He's in Stockholm. He was in Stockholm. And I think David is one of the that's a short list of economists worldwide who will win pretty much every award. And I'm really pleased to introduce him. I just want to say that just yesterday there was a New York Times article about David's work on what's happening in the gender gap that is emerging. He's apparently been writing about it for 10 years. We were talking yesterday, or texting yesterday. But there's a real issue with boys and young men in the world economy. It played out in the recent election as well in the United States. And he, as usual, as a pioneer, has spoken about it and begun to sort of talk about how young men, especially in the US and the West, are falling behind and unable to keep up, leading to all sorts of other issues. So it's really a great pleasure to see David here. And thank you, David, and take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Sanjay, for that kind introduction. It's a delight to see you. And thank you for inviting me to speak. I can't see any of you, so I'm going to assume there's an audience of thousands. Oops, now I really can't. Now I see a podium. And I will be presenting on expertise, artificial intelligence, and the work of the future. And I hope to speak for about a half an hour. And I welcome your questions. So I think it'd be difficult to do a sort of an interactive Q&A while I'm speaking, but I'll leave time so we can have a conversation. So let me begin by sharing my slides. Great. Okay, great. So I want to start with the world as it is. This is a young woman weaving a rug in India. These are men mining for cobalt in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Notice that she is weaving on an ancient loom. Those men are working without pickaxes, without respirators, without helmets, without headlights. So ancient technology. Now let's think as imagine it's 2034. And transformative AI enables machines to do virtually all the tasks humans currently do. Let's try to visualize how their jobs are transformed. That's right, not at all, not in the least bit. And the reason the answer is not at all, of course, is those jobs, there are already technologies that can do that work. Obviously, there are modern looms that don't require nearly as much labor. Certainly, there are modern technologies for mining that don't put men in such mortal danger, and yet they're not used. The reason they're not used is because labor is so cheap. Labor is so cheap that it doesn't actually make sense to automate. Why do I raise that point? Well, you might think that in the developed world, the industrialized world, where we have so much capital, so much technology, so much infrastructure, that labor would be a relatively small part of economic activity. But in fact, the opposite is true. Labor's share of gross domestic product is highest in industrialized countries. So for example, in North America, 6 out of every $10 of economic activity is first paid to labor. The world average is about 54%. In parts of North Africa, that's as low as 43%. So one of the miracles of modernity, one of the miracles of development, is that even as we have created technologies that have saved us so much labor and so much work, so much of what we used to do for a living, labor has become more valuable. And I don't just mean that wages have risen. I mean, labor's share of all economic activity has risen. That is a remarkable accomplishment, and labor scarcity is valuable to us. It's something that is critical to the well-functioning of society, and even, I would argue, to the functioning of democracy. So where does labor scarcity come from? Why is labor valuable in the rich world where there are so many machines that can do so much of the work? I'm going to argue that the difference is expertise. That's what makes the difference. So let me start with an example. Look at these, consider these two jobs, crossing guard and air traffic controller. These, in many ways, are the same job, right? The job is to prevent collisions between different vehicles and one another, between children and cars. And yet air traffic controllers make more than 4 times what crossing guards do. And it's useful to think about why. Why are those earnings levels so different? It's not simply social value. If we had to pay in the United States $130,000 a year to prevent our children from being run over by cars on the way to school, we would spend that money. The difference is expertise. Becoming a crossing guard requires no specialized training or certification, and essentially anyone, can do that job. So whereas becoming an air traffic controller requires years of air traffic control school, and then thousands of hours of apprenticeship. But I want to make an important distinction. This is not about years of education per se, but simply a matter of specialized knowledge. So, if we suddenly ran short on on crossing guards, we could get air traffic controllers to do that job. But if we suddenly ran short on air traffic controllers, we could not get crossing guards to do that job. So expertise is what distinguishes these two roles. So let me define terminology here. Expertise means domain-specific knowledge or competency required to accomplish a particular goal. So the goal could be to code an app, to bake a loaf of bread, to examine a patient, to remodel a kitchen, right? To drive a vehicle. Expertise is what makes labor valuable. It's the knowledge to accomplish certain tasks. Now, not all expertise is valuable. For expertise to be valuable, you need 2 things. One is the goal that it enables must itself have market value. So it's got to be, data science, not just card tricks. The second is that expertise must be scarce. So I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Incredibles, but so I'm gonna take a risk here and make a little joke. If you remember the character Panic from the movie Incredibles, he says, when everyone is special, no one is special. Well, when everyone is expert, no one is expert. Expertise really refers to scarcity. And what that means is that 2 things. One is non-expert work pays poorly, and I'll say more about that in a second. But 2, expertise is a constantly changing phenomenon. What is expert in one period is not necessarily expert in another. And understanding the evolution of expertise is critical for understanding how technology interacts with labor. Non-expert work pays poorly. So think of the jobs, waiter, cleaner, janitor, security guard, school bus driver, daycare teacher, crossing guard, right? Some of these are life and death activities, right? The lives of children depend upon these jobs being performed safely. And yet they're all poorly paid in the industrialized world. And the reason is because almost anyone can do that work without specialized training or expertise. So to understand how technology has interacted and will interact with the value of human labor, it's useful to think about the evolution of demand for expertise. So let me start there. I'm going to talk very briefly about the industrial revolution, then about the computer revolution, and finally about the AI revolution that we're in now, and that's where I'll spend most of my time. So prior to the computer revolution, from the period from about 1880 to 1980, we were in an era of what I'm going to call the era of mass expertise, where workers worked in many workers on production lines, in offices, worked in well-organized settings where you had to master rules and operate tools. And this required a certain amount of knowledge. It often required literacy and numeracy. It was a very productive way to organize labor. What preceded it, of course, was the artisanal world, where people did very broad jobs in specializing in just one activity. This was a different way of organizing work, and it worked quite well for about 100 years in terms of making use of highly educated workers. By highly educated, what I mean in that period was people who had gone through to high school. And so that job of following rules and mastering tools, right, took a significant amount of skill, and it was highly productive. And this was a very effective way to organize industrialization. And that begins to change let's say approximately 1980, with the advent of the industrial computer. So I put up here a picture of what I think of as the first computer, which is the first commercial computer, excuse me, which is the Jacquard loom of 1801. So what makes this a computer, distinct from all the other machines that preceded it, is a symbolic processor. It accesses, analyzes, and acts upon information. So those brass plates you see in front of you, those are punch cards with instructions to the loom about which arms to lift and which threads to use. That's not a picture of what it's supposed to weave. They're actually a set of symbols and codes that instruct the machine on what to do. And this was such a powerful idea, in fact, that Herman Holrith was inspired to create the paper punch card based on the Jacquard loom. That was used to read the 1890 US Census of Populations, the first machine-read census of populations. And then he joined forces with Thomas Watson to form the company IBM, which you have heard of. So this was an incredible breakthrough, and it gave machines the capability to follow instructions and carry out rules. And so things that could be codified as a series of steps, as a series of instructions, such as following rules and operating tools, could eventually be done cheaply and reliably and rapidly by symbolic processors. This ability to carry out rules and operate tools was new to machinery, but what's quite amazing about it was the rate of progress. So it's estimated by the economist William Nordhaus of Yale that there was at least a trillion-fold decline in the cost of computing between 1950 and 2010. But what do I mean by that? Let's say there was a series of calculations that was so incredibly intensive that it would cost $1 trillion to accomplish in 1950. Well, by 2010, you could accomplish those same calculations for $1. And so this is an amazing rate of progress. But of course, since those machines did some of what workers used to do, that was also quite disruptive. Computerization automated a large share of this mass expert work: production, clerical, administrative support, sales, jobs that were skilled jobs that followed rules, that required literacy and numeracy, previously only effectively done by human brains, all of a sudden were done by machines. And this had the effect of pushing workers out to using Sanjay's terminology, of this barbell. So in the center of this occupational distribution, you see a decline, and this happened in many industrialized countries in this period, of production, office, clerical, administrative support, and sales work, and people being pushed towards the two extremes. On the right side, you see highly paid technical, professional, and managerial workers, most of them with college degrees. And on the left side, you see people doing personal services: food service, cleaning, security, protective service, home health aides. Now, that's socially valuable work, but it's poorly paid because it's not expert work, because many people can do that work without specialized training or knowledge. And so this led to a kind of a polarization of employment. Now, I want to be clear, this was not the only factor. There was changes in laws, there were changes in unionization, many social forces, so I don't want to oversimplify, but technology was an important part of this. Now, looking at this figure, you might say, okay, why the middle? Why not the edges? Why only in the center? So the explanation for that comes down to what some call Polanyi's paradox, referring to the philosopher Michael Polanyi, who made the following observation. We know more than we can tell. Many of the things that we do, we don't actually formally understand how we do them, right? So if you're trying to figure out how to come up with a novel hypothesis, or tell a compelling story or a joke, or even, how to dribble a basketball or ride a bicycle. These are not things you learn on a blackboard. They're not things that you understand formally. You learn them tacitly. You learn them through experience, and they're parts of your brain that can do this work, and yet you never know the rules for what you're doing. Well, why is that relevant? Well, historically, we couldn't computerize tasks that we didn't explicitly understand. If we didn't know the rules, we couldn't write a piece of software that would do that work for us because we didn't have explicit instructions. And so that was really the state of computing pre-AI. And it was incredibly powerful. It was incredibly productive. It was incredibly disruptive in its way, but it had this limitation of not being able to overcome, Polanyi's paradox, the fact that we don't know how to describe many of the things we do. Now, of course, what you fully understand is artificial intelligence changes that, right? AI can do tasks that look nothing like the loom, look nothing like following rules and procedures. AI can learn autonomously from unstructured data. It can do tasks that you would think of as creative, as if they were done by a person, like making these illustrations. It can discover and invent. So to give you just one example of that, some of you may have heard of AlphaFold. So in structural biology, one of the great challenges is to figure out the structure, the physical shape, the folding structure of protein. So you're looking at this thing that looks like a party streamer is a protein. It's made up of amino acids, and it's actually not hard to find out the sequence of amino acids that make up a protein. But knowing what type of party streamer it will look like, that's an incredibly hard problem. It's so hard that biologists ran a contest called CASP, the Critical Assessment of Protein Structure Prediction Competition, from 1994 to present, where teams of structural biologists would be given a set of amino acids at the beginning of the contest, and then they would have several days to make their best predictions about what the folding structure of those proteins were. Now, the person who organized the contest, John Molt, he knew the answer, and so he could check their answers against the actual outcome. So in the year 2020, a company called DeepMind entered a piece of software into the contest, no biologists, called AlphaFold. And it also made predictions about how proteins folded based on their amino acid sequences. And Science magazine in 2020 wrote, "The game has changed. AI triumphs at protein folding. Artificial intelligence has solved one of biology's grand challenges." The founder of the competition, John Molt, said, "This is a 50-year-old problem. I never thought I'd see this in my lifetime." And as many of you will know, just 2 months ago, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded to Demis Hassabis and John Jumper of DeepMind for this piece of software. This is an amazing expansion of capabilities. You might say, well, how does AI do this? Well, what it does is it learns in some ways similarly to how humans learn. It recognizes patterns. This piece of software doesn't know how proteins fold. There's nowhere in the software that says these are the steps. It simply learns from examples, recognizes patterns, and makes predictions, which is a lot of what we do. I'm not saying it's identical to how we think, but it has a lot of similarities. So what does this do for work? How does this affect the demand for human expertise? Well, let's start off by recognizing that AI is already woven into daily life. This is not unfamiliar. You just may not have noticed it until very recently. So if your smartwatch asks you, have you taken a fall? Or your car tries to steer you back into lane on the highway, or your writing application offers to assist you with your writing task, these are all examples of AI actually reading the room, reading your intentions, and trying to predict what you're doing and help you complete those tasks. So how does that interact with the demand for human expertise and what knowledge and capabilities humans have? Well, let me start by specifying that AI is a tool, like a calculator or a chainsaw. It is not an animate object. It doesn't have intentions of its own, much as people will tell you otherwise. Many tools augment the value of human skills and expertise, right? If you're a doctor, you would certainly want to have a stethoscope. If you were a roofer, you wouldn't want to do your job without a pneumatic hammer. If you were an air traffic controller, if you didn't have a radar and a GPS and a two-way radio, you would just be a person standing in a field staring at the sky, right? You could not do your work. And so in many cases, mastery of tools is the embodiment of human expertise. Tools shorten the distance between intention and result. And many of us could, our work, our knowledge would sort of actually not be worthwhile without the tools that we have to execute it. So the good scenario, the potential for AI, how it could be used well, is to enable workers with the right set of skills to perform more expert work, to extend the range, the value, the applicability of human expertise. But not all tools are friendly to expertise. So from 1894 forward, if you wanted to become a black taxi driver, a black cabbie in London, you had to spend about 3 years mastering an elaborate act of memorization, what was called gaining the knowledge, which was basically memorizing all the highways and routes and byways and underpasses of London. And that made you extremely good at navigating around the city. But once phone-based routing, GPS and things on your phone were introduced, that expertise was economically irrelevant. It was stranded. It's not that people didn't know that stuff. It's that, well, look, your smartphone app also knows all the highways and routes and underpasses of London. Plus, it knows how much traffic is on those highways at any given moment in time, which is something you could never learn from memorization. And so there's a real tension or a real, a range of possibilities that range from stranding, making human expertise irrelevant, to making human expertise more valuable. And we should start by recognizing that both of those things will go on. It's not going to be either or. And so I often say to people, you should be more pessimistic about the consequences of AI and more optimistic simultaneously than you are, because there's a lot of upside and some downside. So let me talk about some of the downside before I talk about some of the upside. So I think one of the great perils of AI is that its potential to undermine human expertise, to make it less effective. So let me give you two examples. Let me start with a very dramatic one and then talk about one that is much closer to home, but in some ways, I think illustrates the same points in a more modern context. So let me start with Air France Flight 447 in 2009. So in June of 2009, Air France 447 took off from Rio de Janeiro, headed for Paris. At about 35,000 feet, right over the Atlantic, the pitot tubes froze over. Those are the speed sensors on the aircraft. That's not an uncommon occurrence. And when that occurred, the autopilot sensed that it could no longer determine the velocity of the aircraft. And so it partly disengaged, as it is supposed to do, and the plane rolled. Not a severe roll, but just a roll. In the confusion that followed, the crew stalled the aircraft. What it means to stall the aircraft is not that the engine shuts off, but that the angle of attack of the wing is so steep that it loses lift. It loses the Bernoulli effect that keeps airplanes afloat. In the 3.5 minutes between the time that the autopilot shut off and the plane collided with the water, the crew did not understand what had gone wrong. The voice recorders have been recovered from this crash, and you hear the autopilot saying, stall, stall, stall. And you hear the crew saying, what is happening? What is happening? I don't understand what's happening. This cannot be happening. Only in the final 30 seconds did the captain realize what had gone wrong. But at that point, it was too late to recover the aircraft. So the accident report from this famous and horrible fatality was that the crew lacked the experience on the characteristics of high altitude manual flying. In other words, their expertise had been degraded from too much time not flying and relying on machinery. So this is an extreme example, but let me give you another example that's contemporary and I think actually illustrates the same phenomenon. So this is a screenshot of a piece of software called Chexpert, Chest X-ray Expert. And this is an AI tool that reads radiological scans and makes predictions about what it sees, what it thinks it sees. So if it might say edema is, edema is likely, pneumonia is very likely. And so it does what radiologists do. And this is a fabulous application of AI because when it comes to reading x-rays, there are no simple rules. There's no yes or no. It's all prediction. That's what a radiologist does as well. And you learn judgment from looking at tens of thousands of scans over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours, and you get better and better at this. And Chexpert, because it's trained on hundreds of thousands of scans, more than a doctor will ever see, it's really quite good. So on its own, without contextual information, head to head against medical doctors using exactly the same information, Chexpert does as well as at least 2/3 of them, right? So it's better than the median radiologist at just reading scans. So you might think that the combination of Chexpert and radiologists would be even better still. But that turns out not to be the case. So research by my colleagues Nikhil Agarwal and Tobias Sals and their student Alex Mooring and another student, Raj Bakur, did an experiment with Chexpert. And they found that radiologists did systematically worse using Chexpert than they did on their own. How could that be? It's such a good tool. Why didn't it work well? Well, the answer, what the terminology they use is correlated uncertainty. So let me explain what that means. So the radiologist and the software are looking at the same X-ray. So their opinions are often going to be highly correlated. So when the software is unsure what it sees, the doctor will be often unsure what she or he sees. When the software is very confident what it sees, the doctor will also typically be very confident of what she or he sees. So what do they do when they disagree? Well, when they're both uncertain and they reach different conclusions, the doctors tend to defer to the software. When they're both very confident and they reach different conclusions, the doctor tends to override the software. Well, it turns out neither of those is the right instinct. When there's a lot of uncertainty, people do better out of sample, right? They are better at using contextual information and working amid uncertainty. They have better judgment for reasoning beyond the example. When there's a lot of certainty, the doctor should at least ask him or herself, hey, look, this thing has seen more scans than I will see in 10 lifetimes. If it's really sure, am I sure that it's not right? Now, it's not the case it's always right, but at least they should be asking themselves that. Now, what I want you to take away from this is not that this is a bad piece of software or it can't be useful, but this is a failure of design, right? This is a failure to integrate human capability and machine capability effectively. Why did this go wrong? Well, it turned out, and this is very common, that this technology was not tested with doctors, right? It was tested against data sets of scans and asked how well it did at predicting the labels. No one ever asked the question, how well did doctors do working with this tool? And doctors had no way to know how well they were using it because there was no feedback. There was no flight simulator for reading x-rays. And so the conclusion to take away from this is it's actually quite challenging to integrate these expert opaque technologies with human expertise and get the right results. I think it's quite doable, but it doesn't happen automatically. And the assumption that if the tool is good, that the user will get good results with that tool is not a good assumption. And in fact, that's the case with the autopilot as well. That was a perfectly good autopilot, and yet it led to bad results, not because it was bad at what it did, but because the interaction between the human expert and the machine expert was unsuccessful. So now let me talk about some of the upside potential. So I talked about undermining human expertise. Now let me talk about augmenting human expertise. Now I could give a lot of examples, but let me just focus on two. Let me start with one by Eric Brynjolfsson of Stanford, Danielle Lee, my colleague at MIT Sloan, and Lindsay Raymond, who was Danielle's student. And they looked at the use of generative AI in a call center setting. So let me explain the case. This is a company, the company basically provides a piece of enterprise software that its customers use to run their businesses. Imagine it, it handles accounts and sales and so on. So when the software goes down, their customers' businesses go down. You could think of it as being like Salesforce, although it's not actually Salesforce. So when that happens, the customers chat in, they use a chat window to get technical support. So a customer might say something like, my name is Alex, I'm super frustrated. I've had customers calling me all day saying they can't access their information on the website. I need this fixed ASAP. Now you might think this software would then respond to the customer, but that's not what happens. Instead, the software reads the chat and then suggests possible answers to the customer service agent. So it might say, I completely understand, Alex, I can assist you, tell me your email, or happy to help get this fixed. Let's set expectations. We're going to find your account and work our way through this. So now let me show you what happened. So on the horizontal axis here is how long the customer service agent had worked for this company. On the vertical axis is how many calls they were actually able to resolve per hour. So starting with the people in blue, these are people who never use the software. So these are the pre-software customer service agents. You can see that they start being able to resolve about 1.8 calls per hour when they first start the job. After 10 months, they're up to about 2.5 calls per hour. All right, so they've gotten considerably faster. These customer service agents, depicted by the green line, they start without the software, and then they're given it at 6 months. And you can see this very rapid overtaking. So by the end of 6 months, they are successfully handling 3 calls an hour. And then the people in red start with the software immediately at day 1. And at the end of 5 months, they are above either of the groups. Now, so that's a good result. But what I want you to notice in this figure is that everybody starts off being bad at this job, right? It's not that the software makes everybody good immediately. Instead, people using this tool converge more rapidly towards expertise, right? And that's kind of critical. In other words, it's supporting the acquisition of expertise. It's not simply replacing it. And in fact, one of the actually amazing results of this study was that the quit rate of these customer service agents fell once this tool was put into place. So just imagine what this type of job is. This is a high pressure job. It's a lot of emotional labor. You take a lot of abuse from customers. They can be quite rude. It's kind of a road rage phenomenon. The chatbot actually intermediated a lot of that. So sentiment analysis of the text of these chats suggests that the level of hostility from customers to support agents and from support agents to customers actually fell once they started using this piece of software. So this is an interesting example where you see that this tool sort of supporting the development and exercise of expertise, not simply undermining it. Now, I could give you other examples like that, but let me not do that in the interest of time. Let me give you one other more recent example. And this is actually by a student of Daron and myself named Aidan Toner Rogers. And he's just a second-year PhD student at MIT, but this is an amazing example. So he studied the use of generative AI in material science. So material science is the branch of engineering, effectively, that creates materials that has specific properties, like, for example, heat resistance, low flammability, sticky glue, smooth surface, high tensile strength, etc. So you're engineering different materials for the exteriors of cars versus things that stand up to heat versus things that you use for spacecraft. And generative AI is really having a huge impact in material science. So this just gives you the count of material science mentions on PhD syllabi, on publications. So what Aidan does is he looks at a company that uses this, introduces this in an experimental way to improve the way they do material science. So they use something called inverse materials design. What that means is they start off with a set of target features, they run it through this graphical neural network, and then it comes out with a predicted structure of a material that would have these desirable properties. It's using a kind of a stable diffusion architecture. But the main thing you need to know is you start with features that you would like, and then it predicts a material that might have those properties. So I want to tell you what this did in 2 stages. First, I want to talk about how this affected productivity, and then I want to talk about how this interacted with human expertise. So at the productivity level, this was actually quite amazing. So they rolled this out. So I want you to imagine this company has over 1,000 PhDs that do material science, and they work in teams, and they roll this out across different teams at different points in time to give a kind of a quasi-experiment, just a staggered treatment. So if you look at the effect on new materials, the production of new materials rises by about 40% within under a year. If you look at new patent filings rise by about 30 to 40% after about a year. And then if you look at actual product prototypes potentially going into sales, right, those increase by about 20% after a year. So this is incredible progress, right? This is an amazing acceleration of productivity. And more than that, it wasn't just quantity. If you look at the degree to which the materials actually meet the target properties set up in that vector initially, they're closer matched to what objectives they were targeting. And if you look at the novelty of the materials as measured effectively linguistically, it's hard to explain, but they appear to be somewhat more novel as well. So these are actually really good results. Now, let's look at how it changed the nature of work and expertise. So prior to the use of this tool, material scientists would spend about 40% of their time just coming up with ideas for materials, like thinking of new ways to do things. They'd spend about a quarter of their time then trying to evaluate whether those ideas were good ideas. And they'd spend about a third of their time running experiments to determine if the materials actually worked. Once this tool went into place, things changed radically. So once they started using this Gen AI, they're now spending 1/6 of their time on idea generation. They're spending 40% of their time on assessing whether the ideas are any good, and then about 44% of their time on experimentation. So it's a huge change in the division of labor between, the allocation of time of workers, the division of labor between machines and workers. So let's ask how that worked out. So let me explain this figure. So when you're doing lab science, you have a bunch of ideas. You're always going to test your most promising ideas first. So look at this light blue line. This is scientists working without ideas, and they're without AI. So their first experiment would succeed about 90% of the time, and then it would fall to 50% of the time, and then after a while, they were out of ideas, right? So the last ideas they're exploring had about a 0% success rate. Once they started using this tool, their initial success rate was actually lower, meaning they were not as good at predicting how well it would do. But there was a long tail of ideas that succeeded. Now, what Aidan does is he breaks these scientists into effectively two groups. The bottom quartile, the people who were least productive, not using AI, and the people who were most productive, not using AI. So if you look at the people who were least productive, and before they used AI, right, they still had a pretty good success rate going down the curve as they did more and more experiments. Once they started using this generative AI, they were no better than chance. They were just picking at random. They could not tell which ideas were good ideas and which ideas were bad ideas. If you look at the top quartile scientists, right, they had a very high success rate without AI. Using AI, they had a lower success rate initially, but they had a long tail of successes. So it turned out only about the top third of scientists actually benefited from using this tool. The other 2/3 did not. So again, what I want to emphasize there is there was a complementarity between the judgment of the scientists and the capabilities of the tool, just like actually with those X-ray radiologists, right? There's room for this interaction between the machine producing suggestions, producing ideas, and the human's ability to judge and filter. And this kind of metacognition, this ability to work with machine expertise and make good decisions is actually going to be more valuable over time. So let me just say, we really don't have a good answer yet about what is the average effect of AI in workers or expertise. We see many different examples. So we see some that look like in customer service, this kind of leveling up phenomenon where it helps people become more expert or more effective. We see that in customer support, in writing, in software development. But then that's not a universal law. In some cases, we'll see job displacement, just like those taxi drivers. In the case of those material scientists, you might see just amplification of superstars. In some cases, you might see expertise all of a sudden become not very valuable because everybody can do the work. So it's too early to say what the central tendencies are, but there are good ways to use it. So an example I will give, this really has nothing to do with AI, but I think it's quite illustrative. In the United States, we have a job called nurse practitioner. Nurse practitioners are registered nurses who spent an extra year to get a master's degree and then have done additional training. And this allows them to do things that used to only be done by medical doctors with an additional 5 years of education. They can diagnose, they can treat, and they can prescribe. And this occupation, which has grown considerably, there were effectively 0 nurse practitioners in the United States 25 years ago. Now there's hundreds of thousands. They're highly paid. They are really valuable to patients. And they do expert work that used to be done only by more expensive professionals. Now, they are not a function of AI. However, they are now hugely augmented by access to technology. Right? They have access to electronic medical records, to diagnostic software, to prescription software that looks for drug interactions and says, do not prescribe these two things together. It's fine to prescribe these two. And so that extends their capabilities. And it's not hard to imagine a future where nurse practitioners will have a broader scope of practice because there are more expert tasks they can do because they have better tools. And if that sounds, kind of implausible or scary to you, think about the fact that in much of the world, the most educated medical practitioner for 100 miles or for 100 kilometers might easily be a nurse, right? And so you want that person to have better tools to be able to do more and assess more. I think AI is going to be enormously beneficial in medicine. So that is sort of, I bring that up as an example of how one can extend expertise. So let me now kind of turn to the final part of my talk. I'm talking about kind of the expert level of work, the expertise level, and you might be asking, as Sanjay is asking, well, should we even be thinking about the quality work or just the quantity? Are we approaching the end of work? Will there become a time when no job is needed? And if you're asking that question, you are in distinguished company. I don't want to say you're in good company, but you're in distinguished company. Here's Elon Musk last year saying there will come a point when no job is needed. And here's Geoffrey Hinton, who won the Nobel Prize this year as well for his work on artificial intelligence, who says, get a job as a plumber, right? So these guys think the future is either no work or a world in which everyone is a plumber. I'm going to tell you two reasons why I do not think this prediction is correct. The first one is very concrete, and the other one is actually more fundamental. So concretely speaking, in much of the industrialized world, we're actually not running out of jobs, we're running out of people, right? So it's predicted in a large number of OECD countries that the working age population will shrink on the order of 20 to 30 to 40% in the next 35 years. And of course, this is true through all the developed parts of Asia, in Korea, in Singapore, in Japan, in China. So as you're all well aware, this is not just a European phenomenon. Now, the problem with populations shrinking, it's not a problem to have fewer people. It's the transition from having more to having fewer, because what you get for a while is many, many elderly individuals who've earned a retirement, need to be cared for, expect to have a reasonable standard of living, and need workers to support them. So we have lots of demand for workers, and we need them to be more productive. So the technology is going to be really important. Now, of course, you all recognize that the scarcity of labor is artificial, right? It really has to do with immigration restrictions. There are lots of people throughout the world who would be glad to come to these countries and do that work. So this is a self-imposed problem. Unfortunately, I don't think there's no evidence that we're going to stop imposing upon ourselves. But I don't see us running out of jobs. This is part of the reason. In fact, in the post-pandemic era, in industrial world, we've had incredibly tight labor markets like we haven't seen for decades. But now let me turn to a kind of a more fundamental reason. When you think about why new technologies are transformative, it's not primarily because they do the same old things better and cheaper and faster. It's because they enable new capabilities. So when machine-powered flight was invented and mastered and commercialized, that didn't automate the way we used to fly. We just didn't fly before we had flying machines. Or the invention of the scanning electron microscope did not automate the way we looked at subatomic particles. We just couldn't see them before we had this tool. Or if you were to go back to ancient Greece and automate all the work they were doing, you wouldn't have modern Asia, right? You would have Greece without horses. It wouldn't have flight. It wouldn't have telecommunications. It wouldn't have penicillin. It would not be the modern world. The modern world is as it is, not simply because we've automated work we used to do, but because we created new capabilities that we didn't have. And that has what has made the world, has transformed the world and transformed the way we work. And many of those new tools and capabilities require new forms of human expertise. A lot of the work that we do now is invented work that did not exist before we created the world and the tools and the capabilities that we have done that require the expertise that we now provide. Now, looking forward, we should be asking not what will AI do to us, but what do we want it to do for us? How do we want to use it? We have choices to make about technology. To give you a very concrete example again, back in the 1930s and early 1940s, humanity mastered controlled nuclear fission. Controlled nuclear fission has two very powerful uses. One is you can use it for nuclear warheads. So your neighbor North Korea has an incredible array of nuclear warheads. Another thing you can use it for is energy generation. Japan has an amazing set of nuclear reactors, but what's even more amazing is Japan, which is the only country against which an offensive nuclear weapon has ever been used, has no nuclear weapons, but it has multiple nuclear power plants. North Korea has no nuclear power plants. This is a choice about how to use the technology. It's not about the technology itself. And this is going to be true for AI. There are many ways we can use it. We can use it for censorship. We can use it for real-time content monitoring. We can use it for population control. We could also use it for assisting with elder care. We could use it to provide real-time information to people doing skilled work like repair and construction and design. We could use it to make education more immersive, more engaging, more accessible, and less expensive. These are all possibilities. And so they are the future that we are going to encounter. It's not a prediction problem. It's a design problem. We need to design for the future in which we want to live. So to conclude, the questions that we should be asking ourselves about how we will use this technology are, one, will we use it to extend expertise to make our knowledge and capabilities more valuable because they're more broadly applicable? Or will we use it primarily to automate work, displace workers? Both of these things are possible, and some of both will occur, but we have a choice about where to focus our investment, our energy, and our technology. If we want to extend expertise, how do we make that happen? This is not an easy question to answer. This is a question for R&D. It's an essay. Just simply saying, I want to make a human augmenting technology, that's not even a well-defined term. We can talk further about that. So I think this is a huge challenge. We should be asking how can and should and will industry, will government, will universities, will trade unions shape the work of the future? All of these actors are engaged in building the future. Universities, as Sanjay and I work at, right? They set research priorities. What are the problems we focus on? Part of those, in fact, are established by governments that provide a lot of our funding. So it's not we just build things and see what they do. We always go at it with a purposeful design. And so thinking about that design is going to be critical. So let me end with a optimistic note. My Whirlpool washing machine has actually more processing power than the Apollo guidance computer that landed the first human on the moon in 1966. And with all that processing power, I can start the rinse cycle in my washing machine from anywhere on the planet that has Wi-Fi or cellular service. And that is completely worthless technology. That does me no good whatsoever. And my washing machine is never going to the moon, right? What makes the Apollo guidance computer great and what makes my washing machine app ridiculous, actually, is not the technological capabilities behind it, but the imagination that went into figuring out what you could use those capabilities for. And so when we think about the future that we want to build, we should be thinking beyond simply replicating human capabilities. We should be looking for those moonshots, those ways to use technology to extend human capability and create things that we don't have the capability to master right now. And if we do more of that, we will get better results. So let me stop there, and I welcome your questions.
Shall we take 2 or 3 questions at a time and then go back to David? Let's start with Hans and then anyone else? And then debate.
And I can only hear you a little bit, so I may have to ask you to repeat the questions for me.
Okay, thank you for a wonderful lecture. It was really an eye-opener and very enjoyable. I'm a professor here at ASB. I work with Sanjay. I work for Sanjay, I suppose I should say. So my question is about your last question we should ask. How should universities think about both the content of the kind of education we do in different fields and the mode of delivery, perhaps, put it that way? Something, by the way, I'm sure you know that Sanjay is very passionate about.
Of course, he was the Dean of Open Learning at MIT. Should I answer that question before I'll take them one at a time for now? Great. Yeah. So, I mean, I think in terms of, there are two questions you're asking. One is the content, the other is the mode of delivery. So I think a lot of um, human expertise is going to have to be applied to kind of what I called metacognition or judgment, right? It's actually establishing the problem, finding the right tools, and figuring out whether we have a good solution. And this is very different from kind of rote problem solving, as Sanjay mentioned earlier. But I actually think it's what universities have tried to teach for quite a long time. When we think about an educated person, we don't think about a person who simply can regurgitate facts and figures. We think about someone who can take a problem and think about it analytically and come up with a creative, well-reasoned, scientifically evidenced solution to that problem. And so I think that people will continue, that will become more important, not less important. We will have better tools, and using them well will be a huge skill. And this is actually quite a different problem than from when I was a kid, when Sanjay was a kid, right? We learned lots of facts, and they were hard to come by. You would have to go to a library and research things, and then you would bring your facts back with you. Now we live in a world that is drenched in information, but a lot of that information is unreliable, it's of low quality, it's of uncertain provenance. And a lot of the challenge actually is, how do you make sense of a world where you're overloaded with sources and facts and figures, some of which are good and some of which are bad? How do you come up with analytical, well-reasoned solutions? How do you persuade others that those are good solutions? How do you lead people in that enterprise? So I think that skill will be more, not less important. In terms of the pedagogy, that's a really good question. And I think that has a different answer. I mean, so first of all, despite all the technology that we have available, we haven't done much better than the classroom. Why am I sitting here as opposed to why are you watching a video of me? Somehow we think that interacting with others makes education much more compelling. Now, I think we can go further with that, but going further doesn't mean simply replicating classrooms online. It really means using tools to make learning more like the way adults learn. I talked about earlier how so much of what we learn tacitly, not explicitly, right? We learn it through experience, not simply through formalization. Well, we can use modern tools to create simulated environments, just like people have flight simulators, or if you're learning to do medicine, you don't actually start out by operating on people. You do procedures on animatronic dummies that scream and bleed, right? So more learning could be like simulation. And that's what these tools will be good for. So I think there's going to be, if we do it right, we will do more learning. Some of it's interactive, it's like in a classroom, but some of it will be interacting with the world, at least a simulated world, to master skills. So I think that's an opportunity that we're only at the beginning of, but we have tools that are going to make that much more cost effective, much more feasible, and much more realistic.
Thank you, David. Ippei.
Okay, thank you very much for the fantastic talk. I'm Ippei Fujiwara, a professor at the Keio University in Japan and the Australian National University. So I enjoyed your talk. And when I teach the Econ 101, I'm always using your TED Talk video. This is the delivery master. It's the video. It's entertaining and informative. So Hans asked about the education. I'd like to ask you about the government intervention. I think your usage of the nuclear technology example is really informative, and it clearly tells that just profit-seeking of activities may lead to the significant negative externality. Then, in this sense, the problem may be similar to the pollution problem or global warming, global kind of the environmental problem. But do we need to think about the new public policy or public economics way, or maybe still we can use the knowledge of the public policy we have obtained in the past literature? That's my question.
Yeah, so I think this is I think it's a central question, and I agree with the analogy about the sort of externalities or the social costs, right? Obviously it's in firms' interest to not employ workers if they don't need them, but it's in our collective interest to have people working. And so, in some settings, those externalities are sort of second order. Well, if everyone else is going to be hiring, it doesn't matter if a couple of firms close down. But they could be first order if lots and lots of firms are finding they're doing this simultaneously. And so part of that is about incentives, part of that is about social insurance, but part of that is actually about trying to steer the direction of the technology itself and how we use it. And I do think there are better and worse ways to use this. And But what does it mean to use it well? In my terminology, what using it well means is enabling people to do more valuable work. And often in industrialized economies, we have overpaid, over busy professionals, and then a lot of people who are not as educated, who are underemployed, and whose skills aren't used well. In fact, that problem has gotten worse, not better, in the computer era, because a lot of those people did do valuable work that is now done by machines. So a good scenario is one in which we create tools that enable people without elite educations, without four-year college degrees. For example, in the United States, 40% of workers have a college degree, the majority do not, to enable them to do more medical services, to do more legal services, to do more repair services or design or construction, to enable, we'll see in software, right? Software development is changing very rapidly because of AI. Now, in some ways, for the incumbent professionals, that's not altogether good. It's going to make their skills less scarce. On the other hand, it may enable more people to do software who couldn't previously do it, who will be able to design websites and do graphics and so on, and that would be actually really good. So, a good scenario is one where you enable more people to do valuable tasks that are, need to be done, that aren't going to be fully automated, but they require judgment. They require a certain amount of knowledge, and that's attainable. So, I do think government has a role in guiding that direction. Right? I don't know if this example is uncomfortable, but China has made a huge investment, for example, in censorship and monitoring, right, and content filtering. That was a government choice, and they've done it extremely well, right? Hats off, that is an amazing technological achievement. But it's not intrinsic to AI. You couldn't do it without AI, but it wasn't because that's what AI does. That's because that's what they spent the money on. But we have other things we could spend that money on, right? One of the great, two of the great problems that humanity faces are lack of adequate healthcare and lack of adequate education. These are two arenas in which we could use these technologies well, and we're not going to run out of work in those arenas. Medicine is going to be hands-on for a very, very long time, but it could be done better, and more people could get access to it. It wouldn't have to be as expensive. So I think, but that does require policy to direct where we invest. And governments actually do this with universities all the time because our grant money often depends on the priorities of governments who are paying for our work.
Thank you very much.
It's exactly 10 o'clock or 9 p.m. in the East Coast, but we can have one final question.
Perfect.
Mark.
I can use this microphone. Thank you very much, Ozer, and thank you very much, David, for your excellent presentation. I'm Mark McKenzie from the CSUN Center. I'm just curious because you use the analogy of the street crosser and the air traffic controller, right?
Yeah.
Now, when I think of AI and its impact, obviously from an income perspective, the skilled workers are likely to be retrainable. The unskilled workers are not likely to be retrainable. And I use the example of the EU removing the subsidies on banana exports in the Caribbean, where the banana farmers were unable, they were at the age where they were unable to be retrained. So the question here is, from a policy perspective, what do we do for those who are untrainable? Do we need a social safety net? And number two, given the acceleration in income in the other group and to the technology firm, where does the funding come from for the social safety net, as well as for education as well?
Yeah, so we do need a social safety net. There's no question. And even if one is optimistic on average that we'll get good results, there are going to be people who are harmed, and we should not pretend that this is a Pareto improvement, that everyone's better off. That's just not going to be true. And so, yes, we need a social safety net. Now, how this works out, it probably depends on how rapidly things change, right? So, Sanjay was talking about, self-driving vehicles, right? If I told you, 25 years from now, we can say with certainty that no one will be driving commercial trucks, right? Those will all be driven by AI. Well, you'd say, okay, well, that's a problem we can handle. 25 years, right? People will stop going into that occupation. People will retire out of it. So we can work with that. If we told you on January 1st, 2025, there will be no more need for truck drivers, that would be an enormous problem, right? Because millions and millions of people throughout the world would be put out of work immediately. So the speed of change matters, right? So we need a social safety net. We need to be paying attention not just to where we're going, but how fast. Now, it's hard to speed it up or slow it down, but we at least need to be thinking about that. And then in terms of who's going to pay for it, this is a real concern. And Sanjay was talking about this earlier about the UBI thing, and UBI will work. And I also am very skeptical of the notion of universal basic income, not because people couldn't use it or couldn't help, but I don't think the political economy of universal basic income is very sustainable. If a small percentage of people believe themselves to be creating all the value and everybody else is just a ward of the state, that is not a recipe for a healthy democracy. Right, that's a recipe for a kind of autocracy, and in the best case, it's a benevolent one. So I think we have a real stake in a well-functioning labor market, and that's the point I began with. Right, the miracle of labor scarcity, and the fact that labor's value has risen over time, and I think that's fundamental to our well-being and fundamental to democracy. Has lots of problems, but it's a pretty good model compared to the alternatives. And so I do think we want to not take it as a given that we're heading, or certainly not try to not I think we should, let me rephrase that. We should recognize as a risk, and we should want to preserve a society and a structure of income that has lots of people doing valuable work. So that's both, we have a stake in augmenting the value of labor, and we have a stake in controlling the unlimited concentration of wealth. And that does require attention to regulation, to the structure of markets, and ownership. And so I think it's a challenging period ahead. I think there's opportunity. There's a lot to be optimistic about. We have tools we've never had. We're going to be able to accomplish things we never could accomplish, but there are real risks that come along with this.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you very much, everyone joining in. Sanjay, would you like to say a few words? David, we are hoping to see you in KL when next time you are in Asia.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. I just want to give David another round of applause.
Thank you.
You know what he does is he burdens us with thoughtful commentary when there's a lot of hype, so lots to think about. So thanks, David. Have a lovely evening, and hope to see you soon. Take care.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a pleasure to speak with all of you, and great to see you again, Sanjay.
Great to see you, David. Take care. Bye. So, with that, I'd like to move to the next phase of our event. I just want to say that I think that the point that David made about the urgency comes from the pace of change. In other words, if you take truck drivers, self-driving truck drivers, I was actually a skeptic on autonomous vehicles. I have a Tesla, self-driving Tesla, which nearly killed me about 2 weeks ago in Boston. And but actually, with foundation models, autonomous cars are going to take another leap. I work in autonomy, and I didn't expect that to happen until about 2 years ago. Now, I think it's going to happen in 5 years. Self-driving will happen much more rapidly in controlled environments. Truck driving on highways is one of them. So you can see fleets of trucks, like a train, going from point A to point B, and then pulling into a special spot, and then a driver gets into the front truck, and sort of like a train takes them to the docking station. And that means that, in fact, the impact on truck driving jobs is going to be not 2050, as David was saying, but much more rapidly, as he was saying, would create a shock. So we're actually, it's the labor shock that I'm more concerned about. I do completely agree that the pace of change, the actual implications, net, will eventually be positive. At the very least, if we don't have babies at the rate that we're going right now, perhaps we'll extinct ourselves before we extinct the planet and jobs. We'll see. So with that positive note, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Kusmina Durabantu. Kusmina got a PhD at Oxford and has a very, very distinguished career. We'll pick up on Mark's comment about governments, particularly. So her work, first of all, Kusmina is at the Alan Turing Institute, which she joined in 2018 and has built up the Institute's public policy research program from ground up. So it's a startup like us, and now it is a flourishing entity with over 40 full-time employees and more than 70 affiliates. Before that, Kasmina worked at Google and also was co-founder of Aurora Energy Research, a space close to my heart, and has been very influential in advisory boards and forums, including at the Financial Conduct Authority, Bank of England, and the Department for International Trade. She's done a lot of work in AI as it has implications in policy making, especially during the COVID crisis. I see Nadia Wan sitting here, had a great impact on Malaysia during COVID, and she's particularly interested in using unconventional data and innovative modeling approaches to help policymakers. So really perfect timing. Please give a round of applause to Kasmina as she comes up to present.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today to talk to you about governing with and for AI. Now, hang on. It's really interesting, you know, every time we give talks about AI, we take a little bit of time to fiddle with the slides. You know, this is one bit in which, you know, it's still sort of, we're still struggling a little bit. Look, the vast majority of what we call AI has been designed by and for the private sector. And in my part of the world, the big tech companies like Alphabet or Meta or Microsoft come to mind when we talk about AI. Now, of course, there are some newcomers on the block, but usually AI design, development, and deployment is very closely tied to huge conglomerates that have the data, the infrastructure, and the talent needed to build massive AI models. But as AI becomes more present and influential in our day-to-day lives, there's an entire sector of our economies, the public sector, that is increasingly asking, what does governing in the age of AI mean, and how do we do it? Now, this question of this question of how we govern in the age of AI has two important components. The first is governing with AI, which is about how policymakers can use AI to do their job better. How do we put these technologies in the service of the public sector? And the second component is governing for AI, which is how do policymakers, how can they create sensible laws and regulations that allow societies and economies to benefit from AI-driven innovation while minimizing the harms? So the question here is, how do you regulate those powerful technologies? I'll talk about both of these components today, but I just want to say up front that we are just at the very beginning of the journey when it comes to governing with AI. We have a lot more questions than answers. So if you think that I've come to you today with a complete set of answers, you're in for a surprise. But what I hope to offer you today is an overview of where we are in the United Kingdom. I hope to offer you a few directions of travel and many ideas of where we actually want to go. So I'll start with the first component, which is governing with AI. And that topic on its own is almost too daunting to understand, because there's an infinite sea of possibilities when it comes to this. So what I want to do is narrow it down and think about it from the perspective of the benefits that AI brings. Now, what is the main benefit that we expect of AI? In reality, we expect so much of every new technological innovation, and AI is no different. We actually project so many of our dreams and our nightmares onto it. Our newspapers, social media feeds, our boardrooms, our inboxes are inundated with stories about the potential benefits of AI-driven technological innovation. But what is this main benefit that we expect of it? And if we are to pick one word where we hope that AI will be able to help, that word is productivity. Is that new and exciting? Well, it's not really new. Productivity is a long-standing hope for technology. But it is exciting because there's a real possibility of this long-standing hope actually being realized with AI. We are developing the science of making computers do things that require intelligence when done by humans. Marvin Minsky, the great cognitive scientist and AI pioneer, clued us into this definition decades ago. And he also clued us in to the ultimate goal of these technologies, which is getting computers to do things that can only be done by humans. And once you get computers to do some of what we do, surely productivity can increase. Surely we can outsource some of our work to them. Now, the potential gains are massive, and McKinsey estimates show that generative AI's impact on productivity. Note that this is generative AI alone, could add up to 3.5 trillion in value to the global economy. Now, that's more than the UK's current GDP. And if you talk to companies, they are teeming with ideas of how to leverage AI to increase productivity. The Bank of England and the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK conducted a survey to understand the use of AI within the UK's financial services. Now, they published the results a couple of weeks ago, and a staggering 75% of financial services firms in the UK use AI. Productivity and operational efficiency are cited as some of the highest perceived benefits of AI. Now, when we look at the UK, the public sector employs about 5.9 million people. And it is responsible for about 20% of the economics output. Now, when we look at the sheer size of the public sector, the wide array of tasks that it performs, it is clear that in theory, at least, the scope for benefits from AI-driven innovation for the public sector is huge. Improvements can and should scale up to a major difference. Now, but what does the practice look like? How can we unlock the massive theoretical improvements? Now, this is where it actually gets really hard. So when you think about what government does, what its day-to-day operations entail, and where AI can really help, there are three massive tasks that come to mind. The first of these massive tasks that the government does is to communicate with its citizens. The second is to confer rights to individual citizens. And the third task is to make policy decisions. Now, I'll walk you through each one of these tasks to show you where we are in the UK when it comes to AI using government, and where I very much hope that we will be. Now, let's start with communicating with citizens. Now, a lot of the work that local and central government do centers around communicating outwards to citizens. So letting them know about the services on offer, the procedures that they must follow, changes in policies, and so on. Now, since generative AI hit the big screens with the public launch of ChatGPT in November 2022, a lot of the questions that I get from various bits of the public sector are about using large language models to respond to citizens' questions. Almost every public sector organization, no matter how big or small, dreams of having a chatbot to respond to citizen queries. But, and this is where the big but comes in, we're not quite there yet in terms of the technology. So if you launch a chatbot built on top of an adapted large language model to answer citizens' questions about taxes, as our tax collection agency has found out in the UK, every now and then you will make up a random tax code and sound incredibly convincing about it. So our advice to public sector organizations when it comes to AI-powered chatbots is to start small and build on the strengths that they have. Now, a promising example that I can give you from the UK is the government's generative AI chatbot. And this generative AI chatbot very much builds on strengths. Now, what is the strength? Well, the UK government has a public sector information website, which is gov.uk. Now, gov.uk is the second most used government website worldwide. It won a ton of awards when it was created about a decade ago. It did so because it managed to centralize the websites of all ministerial departments, all non-ministerial departments, about 400 public agencies and corporations, and ensure that these websites have the same design, writing style, and accuracy requirements. Now, if you have a centralized resource like this, an obvious question is, could you improve the user experience on gov.uk with generative AI? In other words, could you adapt a large language model grounded on published information on the website and have it answer user-specific questions? Now, that's precisely what the team at the UK's Government Digital Service tried to build. Where are we? Well, the project is still very much in experimental mode. It is all built on top of OpenAI GPT-4. And after a lot of internal and external tests, 15,000 people were recently given access to it. And the chatbot is currently linked to 30 gov.uk web pages. That's 30, just 30. Now, the hope, of course, is that this tool will be available to all 11 million gov.uk users, and it's going to draw on the 700,000 web pages that gov.uk has. But look, I mean, the reality is that there is a long way to get there. But the initial steps and the deliberate choice not to move fast and break things are actually really promising. Now, this is where we're at when it comes to using AI to help government perform the very first of its tasks. Okay, we're not very far. I mean, that's the reality of it. What does the future look like? Well, I think that we really must move beyond using these technologies as a way to communicate outwards to citizens. I think that the future is using generative AI to create feedback loops between the public and the government. And generative AI could transform government-citizen interactions. Feedback from citizens could be systematically solicited, collected, and analyzed centrally. Large language models could be used to develop and routinize conversational consultation, where you have online platforms that ask citizens simple questions as they interact with services. So for example, what is your biggest problem in accessing healthcare? And what these platforms could do is try to elicit just a few words of free text. The responses can be analyzed as they accumulate and fed back to citizens, validating key problems emerging, canvassing for possible solutions, and so on. If such a proactive approach could be routinized, that would enable agencies for the first time ever to measure the effects of service or policy change on citizens using real-time data, acting as continual indicators of warning signals when things go wrong. And I think that's what a promising future looks like. The technologies are mature enough to deliver this, and I'm convinced that within the next year or so, we will see a lot more work in this space. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the second task of government, which is where I think AI can help, which is conferring rights to citizens. Now, a great deal of government work involves conferring rights to citizens, such as rights to residency or citizenship, a license or a passport. In the UK, we process about 8 million passport applications a year, and about 2.5 million applications for social benefits. Now, the dream for a lot of ministers is actually to automate entire processes. A lot of the questions that we get at the Turing were along the lines of, can you build an AI system that identifies children that should end up in care? And the answer to that is that you really shouldn't. In the UK, at least, the data is simply not good enough to be able to build a system that you can entrust with such sensitive, life-changing decisions. And in general, we see a lot of public backlash and poor design, development, and deploying practices in precisely these types of projects, where the aim is to automate entire processes. Now, what we advise government to do, and what we really believe that the potential of these technologies to drive productivity increases is to think of any administrative process as a string of micro decisions. So if you apply for a passport, for example, there's a string of micro decisions that need to be made in order to get one. And these are small things like validating a photo or cross-checking text data from the application. Now, we did a study at the Turing and found that central government alone, no, that is just central government, does not include local government, completes about 1 billion of those micro decisions each year. And out of those 1 billion micro decisions, about 120 million have very high potential to be automated with AI. These are things like checking photos or extracting relevant bits of text and so on. Now, this is where the potential for these technologies in government is. And in the UK, we see a fair bit of experimentation and deployment when it comes to automating micro decisions with AI. But of course, we don't hear about these things. You know, we don't read about these things in the paper. Why? Because automating the minutiae of government's bureaucratic processes is not the stuff that dreams are made of. It won't make front-page news, but this is where AI, at the moment, can have the biggest impact in government. What does the future look like? Well, look, I think at some point in the future, we will see entire processes being automated. But we need a lot more research in this area to understand how we can build the right safeguards and the right technologies to make the jump from 120 million to 1 billion. Okay, well, let me take you to the final bit of where AI can help, and that is making policy decisions. Again, in the UK, about 52,000 policy decisions dictate how over £1 trillion of public money gets allocated each year. That's 1.2 trillion last year alone. Improving the way in which policy decisions are made can lead to substantial benefits, and data science and AI can help here in ways that traditional statistical techniques cannot. Now, I have to be careful here because some of the statistical models that economists in particular have built and some of the models that they have developed have served us tremendously well until now. But I do think we have an opportunity to adapt them for an age where every individual and every company generates an awful lot of data that we can use to develop better answers to the questions that policymakers have been asking for years. I'll give you one example here, which comes from the Department for Business and Trade in the UK, which has been working on creating a model of the labor market that has each individual worker in the economy included, and a network that dictates how these workers change jobs. Now, the idea pursued by the Department for Business and Trade is to have an almost virtual lab for the labor market, in which policymakers can easily answer questions such as what happens if a company on the outskirts of London closes? Can the access capacity be absorbed by the local economy? Where are the skill shortages, and who are the workers that can most easily be retrained to fill them, and so on? Now, these models are built by computational social scientists rather than economists. They're hugely attractive to policymakers. Ministers and civil servants want immediate and sort of clear answers to the policy questions of the day. What does the future hold? Well, look, I think we will see a lot more experimentation in policy circles with the creation of models just like the one that I described. And I think the ultimate dream, at least in the UK, is to have something akin to a digital twin of our economies and societies, where you can easily experiment with policy choices. And at the moment, there are various bits of government that are calling for the creation of a national policy simulator. Now, we're very far from that dream, but you can just imagine us being able to get there one day and be able to model in great detail our sort of highly connected, interdependent worlds. We do have a long way to get there. This isn't easy. I don't think you're going to be hearing from us anytime soon about our national policy simulator. But I do think that with the right investment and expertise, you can just about see that it might become possible one day. Okay, look, let's take stock of where we are. We talked about how productivity is one of the most hoped-for benefits for AI. And I have covered 3 areas where I think AI could make a big difference to the public sector, at least in the UK. Crucially, in the examples that I gave for each one of those 3 areas, the reality on the ground is still some years away from the dream that we have. Now, when I think about sort of AI and where the UK is in terms of governing with AI, I sort of see a picture like this in my mind. We have many pilot projects scattered around various government departments and agencies. Some of these are really exciting and show a lot of promise, but the work is still quite siloed, and we do not yet see large-scale systemic improvements from these technologies. Now, this mental image that I have is very much backed by the data on the ground. So if you talk to the frontline workers of the UK's public services, health and social care within the health and social care systems or the educational system, and ask them if they use AI in their job, 10% or sort of at most 13% say that they do. Why is that? Well, look, some of these problems are structural. And in Anglosphere governments in particular, massive outsourcing relationships with global systems integrators caused huge problems. And some of these problems are still being felt to this day. And I'll mention 2 of them. One is that most digital technology projects have been outsourced to private providers rather than developed in-house. And the outsourcing left the public sector organizations in the UK with very little in-house expertise. These days, in the middle of the AI revolution, the lack of technical expertise at the very heart of government is proving to be a massive challenge. And 2, the treasure trove of data that government sits on and that it generates through its day-to-day interactions with citizens is mostly locked away in siloed legacy systems. Retrieving that data to power AI tools and models is a massive and a hugely expensive exercise. Now, an often forgotten fact is that organizational setup in government matters almost as much as the technology itself. And in the UK, important steps are being taken to get this right. First, the UK is working on developing AI expertise and capacity inside of government. And I very, very, very much welcome this move. It is crucial for thinking about the possibilities of AI and also for managing successful contract relationships. Second, the new Labour government is developing a digital government center. The center will bring together what used to be separate units working on AI within various bits of government. And it will be a center of expertise and a trusted source of help, advice, guidance, and prototyping, growing the policy, managerial, and specialist digital community in government. Our hope and recommendation is that there will also be a ministerial lead for public services innovation, with a remit to capitalize on the potential of AI to drive productivity improvements in the public sector. Somebody needs to own this area, and this is what we've been saying for a very long time. And finally, it is important to emphasize that the latest generation of data-intensive technologies offers distinct possibilities and challenges in vertical domains. These domains will also need in-house expertise and capabilities. So big administrative departments like the Ministry of Justice or the Department for Works and Pensions will have the greatest opportunity to achieve productivity gains through the use of machine learning, and the most to lose from failing legacy systems. But the ways in which they will achieve these gains are distinctive. The departments will need to create their own intelligence center with continual flows of information to and from the digital center of government. And centralized capacity, in other words, will not be enough. It will be crucial to bring coherence and drive to government, but vertical capacity will very much still be needed. Now, the very final thing that I want to touch upon when it comes to governing with AI is that I firmly believe that working on productivity is not enough. Productivity is the main hoped-for benefit for AI, but we must not forget that growing inequity is actually one of the most feared harms. And the good news is that growing inequity isn't an inevitable outcome of AI advancement. It becomes inevitable only when productivity is our only focus. So if our aim is to automate everything with AI, to replace workers with technology without putting any mitigating measures in place, we won't end up in a very good place. So working on productivity and equity must go hand in hand, especially if we're working on AI for the public sector. Now, when we think about AI use within the public sector, AI can drive inequity in several ways. The benefits of AI-driven public services may be less likely to accrue to people who are digitally excluded in terms of having access to connectivity, appropriate appliances to run AI application, and the skills to use them. AI has also been shown to affect equity in other ways by producing biased outcomes and reinforcing existing inequities in processes such as hiring, credit decisions, or in public services such as criminal justice. The term artificial intelligence hides the fact that these systems are designed, developed, and deployed by humans. And as such, humans' conscious and unconscious biases and discriminatory practices can and do creep into any stage of an AI system's life cycle. I firmly believe that the public sector has a responsibility to lead when it comes to efforts to put these technologies in the service of everyone, regardless of who they are. And for any government interested in capitalizing on opportunities of AI, I have 3 recommendations. The first is to create a central digital inclusion unit that ensures that people have the right digital skills and access to interact with AI-powered services. Second, tackling head-on issues of fairness and bias in AI technologies and the data sets needed to train them. And third, keeping an open dialogue with the public, understanding their needs, what is working and not working for them when it comes to these technologies. The UK government expects the AI market in the UK to surpass the 1 trillion mark by 2035. But public trust in AI is at a record low. We find ourselves in 2024 at a point in time in which there are more people who mistrust AI than people who trust AI. In the UK, perceptions of negative societal impact of AI have risen steeply from 3% in 2022 to 38% in 2023. We're still waiting for the numbers for 2024. But if AI's potential to add billions or trillions of pounds to our economies is to materialize, we must solve the issue of rapidly declining public trust in AI. And the only way to do that is to involve the public in the AI's design, development, and use. Okay, look, that was quite a whirlwind tour of where we are when it comes to governing with AI. But I hope I've given you an idea of where the UK is and where we see the potential of these technologies, how far apart we are from realizing the full potential, and what steps we need in order to get there. Now, before we part ways, I do also want to tell you a little bit about the other component of governing in the age of AI, which is governing for AI, creating the laws and regulations that allow our societies and economies to flourish in this age of AI-driven innovation. Now, look, you can teach a year-long course on our collective attempts to govern AI, and I only have a little bit of time left with you today, so I thought it might probably be best spent on telling you where we're really struggling. And this is absolutely what keeps me and undoubtedly many others up at night. And I'll start with the first area, which is international alignment. And in the UK, and undoubtedly in other parts of the world as well, we're deeply aware of the fact that AI governance is an area in desperate need for international cooperation. AI development and advancement are global issues, and if countries follow their own path when it comes to AI regulation and standards, not only will this lead to a fragmented and inefficient market, it will also fail to prevent current and future harms linked to AI innovation. Now, there's a flurry of activity when it comes to AI governance around the world, but it is all siloed, the exact opposite of what we want. Now, China was among the first countries to implement AI regulations. On the very last day of 2021, while all of us were sort of, putting our champagne bottles in the fridge, China was passing one of the world's first binding national regulations to rein in the use and misuse of recommender systems. In October 2023, President Biden issued a landmark executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy artificial intelligence. That executive order is now rumored to be one of the first to go under the new Trump administration. Earlier this year, the European Parliament passed the EU AI Act, which is the world's first binding AI law. Brazil is on its fourth proposal for a comprehensive AI bill, following very closely in the footsteps of the European Union. The UK government published in January of this year its response to a pro-innovation approach to AI regulation consultation. Singapore has released a wealth of voluntary governance frameworks for AI. And India is working on a digital act to replace its now 24-year-old IT Act. Now, apart from these national level initiatives and many others, there are also multinational efforts with organizations like UNESCO, the African Union, and the Council of Europe working on multilateral AI governance frameworks. The issue, though, is that we cannot seem to reach any binding agreement across jurisdictions. The EU AI Act is the most we have in terms of bringing a number of countries together under binding rules. And to give you an idea how difficult this is, we're writing a report to the Turing that examines AI governance initiatives in 14 jurisdictions. The very definition of AI varies widely across those 14 jurisdictions. So if we can't even agree on what this thing is, how can we ever agree on how we're going to govern it? Look, the other thing that, another area where we're really struggling when it comes to AI governance is implementation. And this is where the rubber hits the road. This is the moment when you have an idea of how you want to regulate AI, and you have to put that idea into practice. Now, when it comes to regulating AI, some jurisdictions decided that you have to have horizontal regulations. The idea here is that AI feeds into everything. So whatever new piece of legislation you create should apply equally across all AI systems, regardless of the sector in which they're used. Other jurisdictions are saying, hang on, the use of an AI system in health is likely to be very different from the use of an AI system in finance, so it makes no sense to treat them all the same, and a sector-by-sector approach is surely the way to go. In academia, I think we've always known that a combination of the two is what we will need. But it doesn't stop jurisdictions from laying claim to one approach over the other. And many of you will know that the European Union has opted for a horizontal approach, while the UK, of course, decided to go for a vertical approach. We will leverage the expertise of our world-class regulators, is the UK's position. They understand the risks in their sectors and are best placed to take a proportionate approach to regulating AI. Now look, that sounds great, but how will this work in practice? Well, we don't actually know how many regulators there are in the UK. We sort of lost track of them as a country. It's not a closely guarded secret. We just lost track of them. Why? First is because it's really hard to know what should count as a regulator. The UK has a complex range of regulatory bodies, including both statutory and non-statutory organizations. And second, because the landscape is constantly evolving. So new regulators appear. This is one of the things about policymakers. They really sort of like launching new things rather than fixing existing things. It's much more exciting to sort of open a new door. And old regulators adapt in size and remit and so on. With these two caveats in mind, a team of researchers at the Turing mapped the country's regulators. And the mere fact that a team of researchers from the National Institute of Data Science and AI had to spend a significant amount of time to do this tells you about how complex of a task this actually is. Now, the number that we came up with is 108. You see sort of all of them, what the 108 means on the slide. What is the up-to-date number? Well, you know, we don't actually know, but it shouldn't be far off from this. Now, what sectors do these regulatory bodies cover? Well, as it turns out, 6 regulators are horizontal, so they're cross-sectoral regulators. Organizations like the Information Commissioner's Office, this is our Data Protection Agency, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and the Competition and Markets Authority. Now, besides these 6 horizontal regulators, we also have regulators that cover certain sectors, and we like to refer to these as sector-specific regulators. And there are 3 regulators that cover the communication sector, 7 that cover education, another 7 that cover financial services, 22 that cover health and social care, 17 that cover legal and professional services, 7 for policing and justice, 20 that look after utilities, housing, transport, infrastructure, and the environment, and another 19 miscellaneous ones, like things like the groceries code adjudicator that, you know, I mean, I would struggle to tell you what they actually do. Now, but why does this matter? You know, why am I giving you these numbers and these names of regulators? Well, it matters for 2 reasons. The first is, if you have 108 regulators, you do have an enormous amount of expertise. Each one of those organizations has a tremendous amount of knowledge about the bit of the world that it regulates. But the second point that I want to make is that if you have 108 regulators, you also have an awful lot of complexity. And the difficult question is, how do you put a sectoral-based approach to regulation in practice? I mean, we've seen that some regulators are horizontal. They work across sectors. We've seen that there isn't just one regulator for health that you need to go to. There are 22 of them. Consistency, coherence are sort of key qualities of a good regulatory regime. But how do you get consistency and coherence in this highly complex landscape? And that is a question in dire need of answers in the UK and elsewhere. And one of these answers must surely involve setting up some centralized capacity for AI, a central function that will play a coordinating role among all of those regulators. And that brings me to the last of the 3 things that keep me up at night, which is knowing when to intervene. I'll give you one example here, again from the UK. So in 2020, the Bank of England and the Financial Conduct Authority launched the Artificial Intelligence Public-Private Forum, with the purpose to further dialogue on AI innovation between public and private sectors. Now, I was a member of the forum, and together with my colleagues, we published a final report at the conclusion of the working sessions in February 2022. In the report, we flagged the fact that the use of third-party models and data is increasing significantly, and it brings with it associated challenges, such as ensuring full due diligence of the resulting AI systems, and potentially posing system-wise financial stability risks. Financial firms' shared reliance on the same sources of data, systems, and strategies could amplify herding behavior, for example, or increase cyber risk. Now, the Bank of England and the Financial Conduct Authority also run a semi-regular survey on the use of artificial intelligence in the UK financial services. The most recent results are out. They were published just a few years ago, and please do look at them because they do make for an interesting read. 118 firms responded to the latest survey, and lo and behold, the second highest systemic risk related to the use of AI that the surveyed firms identified is critical third-party dependencies. The third highest risk is common data sets and models. Now, why is that? Well, look, the firms know that their world is changing. A third of all current AI use cases deployed by respondents to the bank survey are third-party implementations. This is significantly higher than the 17% reported in 2022. The business areas with the highest percentage of third-party implementations are human resources, risk and compliance, operations and IT, and legal. Now, the survey also asked respondents to list the top 3 third-party providers they use. And the share of the top 3 model providers now stands at 44%. That's more than double the figure reported in 2022. And the share of the top data providers now stands at 33%. Now, what are the regulators' response to this? Well, thus far, the official line is that the Bank of England, the Prudential Regulation Authority, and the Financial Conduct Authorities' policies on outsourcing and third-party risk management put the onus on regulated firms to manage risks from their suppliers where third-party providers support important business functions. So the official line for now is, we think our existing rules are enough. But unofficially, this is very much an area that the financial regulators believe needs careful monitoring and consideration. Will they intervene? Most likely. But when should they do so? And that's what we're struggling to know. When is the right time to step in? Are those figures high enough? Look, that brings me to the end of what I wanted to share with you today. And I have given you, as promised, more questions than answers. But we're sitting today in this wonderful academic institution. And the existence of so many questions in dire need of answers is surely hugely exciting and should be so for each one of us. We will learn a tremendous amount over the coming years about governing in the age of AI. And I hope that some of you will join us on this journey of discovery. And as you've seen today, I hope, we do actually need all the help that we can get. So with that, thank you so much for listening to me, and I'm happy to take a few questions.
Okay, we've got 10 minutes for a few questions. We've got one here, and then Sang. You can press the mic there, and then.
Hi, my name is Nadia. I was just wanting to link back to Prof. Daniel's earlier slides when he showed the material science and how AI actually reduces the quality of success in the beginning. And I just wanted to know whether there were any latest research or thoughts on the impact of AI, because I think what we'll see probably is an increased rate of failure as people use AI and they come up with a lot of things and then realize very quickly that half the things don't work. And so what would be the impact on our policy and firm behavior towards failures, whether there's been anything being done on that? Thank you.
Yeah, I think in government has a big fear of failure. And I think this is why we're seeing government be much more sort of careful with this than private companies. We read about IT disaster after IT disaster in our papers, and nobody wants to be that. So I think this is why we're seeing sort of small-scale, very careful experiments in government, as opposed to sort of big projects. But I do think, as I said, failure can come in from not realizing where the technology is and trying to get it more than it's actually capable of doing, or more than your data is able to answer. But yeah, in the UK, the local government does an awful lot when it comes to AI, so they are much more prone to experimentation. Central government is very, very cautious. The fear of failure is very real, I think.
Well, thank you for the wonderful presentation. The figure that struck me the most was the figure with the 108 individual regulators. And as an economist, I see that as some kind of friction or policy failure to some degree. Any plans for the central regulator to coordinate among these individual regulators in the UK government?
Yeah, I mean, we're very much, yeah, look, 108 is a huge figure. And as I said, I do think that, it's sort of, what people like doing. Even with AI, the initial idea that the government had is, can we just have a new AI regulator? And I think all 108 regulators are saying, no, like, we do not need a new one. Just please do not give us a new one. Yeah, I mean, there are attempts to bring the regulators together. It is notoriously difficult, though, for a variety of reasons. One is, some regulators have amazing AI capacity. Some have none. Some have thousands of employees. Some have just one employee. Getting them all to work together is incredibly challenging. And again, finding the resources for the coordinating role is incredibly challenging. But I think it's very clear that that's what we need. I mean, we cannot get away from that. And I think the other problem that the UK has is that after it exited the European Union, its regulators have a lot of functions that they didn't need to do, that now they need to do. And they haven't been properly funded for that. So there are huge backlogs if you look at medicine approvals, for example, just because we don't have the capacity anymore to deliver. So, we need to sort out those backlogs first before we think about adding even more to their remit and responsibilities. But yeah, it all comes down to resourcing at the end of the day. Like, we know what the right steps are. So where are you going to find the budget for it?
Some are vertical, some are horizontal. So that makes things even more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's why, like, I think, when people say we're going to be working on a sectoral approach, everybody says that makes so much sense. Like, the UK is so right to lead on a sectoral approach, but nobody's looking at this. Like, we don't have one sectoral regulator. We do have horizontal regulators. We don't. It's much more complicated when you actually look at this. And the people on the ground know this. It's just the official policy documents when you read, they're like, makes an awful lot of sense, but it doesn't when you look at the reality on the ground.
Thank you for the presentation. I am Abhinav from Reserve Bank of India. So you said that governing with AI, that involves communicating with citizens, conferring rights to them, and making policy decisions. Now, this can work well in uniform societies like UK, where there is uniformity in cultures, language, etc. What about countries like India, where there is a lot of diversity in terms of cultures, languages, wherein the same policy has to be applied differently to different states and different cities and different tribes and all. So where do you see, how do you see AI faring in such contexts?
No, and that's a hugely interesting question. I don't have the answers for it. But we do look to countries like India, and in many ways, you have done things that, we have not managed to achieve in our world. The things that you've managed to do with sort of digital payments, especially during the COVID crisis, and the whole infrastructure for digital government, that's something that we can only dream of. In the UK, note that the population voted against national IDs. They absolutely hate the idea of having a national ID number. So we don't have an identifying number in the UK. Even sort of, figuring out who the people in the country are and how to identify yourself is a complex challenge. So in many ways, countries like India, countries like Brazil, we have an awful lot to learn from them, and we're going to need to take some of what you're building and transfer it over to us, for sure.
More questions? Hans?
Thank you for a very insightful presentation. If I understood correctly, you mentioned early on that in the financial sector, some 70% of institutions use AI. I just recently read a little article in the Central Banking magazine. Central banking institution, they do surveys of central banks. And there was a survey about the central bank's use of AI, and it was almost the opposite, that the central banks don't use AI yet as much. And some of the reasons were, one of the, what you mentioned was third-party providers, and they couldn't really trust them with internal data. And the other one was the confidentiality of a lot of data that central banks use. Do you have any thoughts on, you work for the Bank of England, so do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and you know, the Bank of England has done quite a lot in this space. So I think they have more than sort of 100, more than 100 projects in which they sort of use data science and AI. There's a recent speech that was given by the chief data officer at the Bank of England, in which he actually talks just about this and links to all of the various publications. They've looked at a lot of things. They've done a lot of natural language processing to look at, you know, company announcements, to monitor media. They've built little systems that sort of, you know, to, allocate office space within the Bank of England. They've used machine learning to forecast inflation. And they are thinking of sort of moving beyond the current macroeconomic forecasting model that they have, which has 175 parameters at the moment. And I think they're looking at sort of the biggest models now that have billions of parameters and thinking, can we do something like that? And so, yeah, I would, if you're interested in what the bank does, I think that's probably the most up-to-date and public sort of statement of what it has sort of done with those technologies to date. But I think the central bank is not different from the government in that it has like a gazillion of tiny little projects, each one of them resulting in a publication. But it's not really sort of systemic change yet.
Okay, it's exactly almost 11 o'clock, 20 seconds to go. I think this has been a wonderful morning. Thank you very much, Cosmina, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and Sanjay. And it's coffee time, I believe. Thank you.
So we will take a 15-minute break, and we shall resume back here at 11:15 a.m. Okay? Coffee will be outside, and see you then. Thank you.
this pursuit. Innovation, excellence, we are all driven by passion. And we redefine the limits of possible.